Welcome to the What Happens Next YouTube channel. What we're aiming to do with this channel is share content designed to make sure that you're supported through whatever's next in your life. And we'd love to continue to do that. I've got a favour to ask today, and what I'd ask you to do is just subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it really helps us deliver really good quality content on a consistent basis. Thank you, and let's go on to the interview. Welcome to What Happens Next, the channel dedicated to explore with a bit of nuance the changes that often impact our lives in our 50s and 60s when we're thinking about making positive change in our lives. And I'm really pleased. We've got a double, I was going to say double trouble, but it's actually double reward. We've got a double partnership today to share their insights with us. Sasha and Roland, welcome so much to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Absolute pleasure to have you. Now, we started the conversation before we jumped on about Sasha and her open water swimming. But I'm curious, Roland, what's your exercise regime? What do you do on a regular basis to make sure you stay fit and healthy?
Well, if you're asking about at this moment in time, Chris, it is not as healthy as it should be. I am spending far too much time driving in the car, etc. But apart from that, I do need to do a lot more exercise. Once I can slow down a bit, then I will do that. But before that, obviously, I looked after myself pretty well.
Yeah,
I can't say the same at this precise moment.
Do you think our lives, when our lives get busy, do you think there's periods where you find yourself getting out of balance? And what do you reckon the thing we need to do to get back in balance? Is it just the freedom of having the time? What do you think?
Well, I think what's important is that you make the time. You should make the time.
Yeah.
I am perhaps not the best role model right now for that, but in actual fact, really, you have to make the time. Never mind how busy you are. You should find the time really to look after yourself, because at the end of the day, if you're not healthy, you can't do the things that you really want to do.
It's true, 100%. Sasha's the role model at the minute, then, I think, is what we're saying, like for both of us. So let's start. I know all about you. I've done the research to prepare for this interview. But in your own words, tell us a little bit about you. Sasha, can we just start with you? Is that okay? Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. So I am Sasha. I was born and raised in Trinidad and Tobago, made Barbados my home during my university time, and I've actually now spent more of my adult life in Barbados than I have in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm an athlete, administrator, an advocate, I think, for all things equality and inclusivity. I love sports, I love life, and I love helping others. And I think that is one of the reasons why Mr. Butcher and I cross paths, albeit very confrontational at first. I was his student, but I think we managed to have a partnership around helping students do better as it relates to sport. So helper, advocate, teacher, I think summarizes who I am.
And we're gonna be talking a lot about how people later in their lives can become mentors, helpers, and advocates a little bit later. But I'm curious about is, having lived in both places, what's the biggest difference between Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados?
Chris, you want to ask me that on camera? I think, like, at the time that I was growing up in Trinidad, it was known to be very fast-paced, very cosmopolitan, big city like. Whereas in Barbados, there was this balance between that advancement but relaxation. And now I think it is still pretty much the same. Trinidad is very much fast-paced. you're on the go all the time. Whereas in Barbados, I think there are opportunities to slow down in Trinidad and Tobago. I won't say there aren't, but I think the lifestyle in Barbados is more work hard, but you also play hard to the extent where you want to make sure relaxation is a part of your routine. And specifically for me, I feel like I've had the opportunity to do more of everything I've wanted in Barbados, from university into my life as an academic and as a professional. So
Love that. And help me understand how you first met Roland.
I was a student on campus. So I played tennis at first. I learned to play football and field hockey at Cave Hill. And in my final year, Mr. Butcher became the director of sport at Cave Hill. And at that time, we were advocating for equality, gender equality, so to speak. So the women would raise the funds, but then the guys would go on the tours, and we'd have to be fighting for these opportunities to be treated as equals, and to recognize our contributions. And in all fairness, at that time, it was women's football that was the center. We weren't necessarily the best, but we had girls who could play, and all we wanted was the opportunity to have a good coach, to have opportunities to play football, etc. So when Mr. Butcher and I had this chance encounter on the field, introduced by our then, I believe he was still guild president, my introduction was, great, welcome to Cave Hill. So, and I started listing out all these challenges with the sports program, and he's like, okay, come see me. And I think the rest is history from there. I think I thought I was going to get this confrontation and I have to make these demands, but he's smart. He was like, okay, no, you come work and come do what you want in terms of getting that equality, so that I don't have to have the headache of listening to you all the time. So he shut me down.
I love how assertive you were, Sasha. That's brilliant. Roland, tell us, for those of our audience who don't know, tell us a bit about you.
Yeah, oh boy, there's a lot to tell. I'm not a young man anymore. Born in Barbados, obviously came to England age 13 and a half. Then really I've spent the majority of my life in UK, some 37 years.
Yeah.
Obviously playing for Middlesex in England and other teams. Before I returned to Barbados, as Sasha said, in 2004 as Director of Sport at university. And really, in effect, I've been pretty much in Barbados up until this time. I retired mid 2019. And then really since then I've been coming to UK during the summer to commentate on the cricket and do the other things that I'm doing. And obviously, as I said, having met Sasha in 2004 at university, we worked pretty well at university, continued after that, to the extent now where, at this point we're still even working further. She's the chair of the Barbados Royals Girls Cricket Club. Once I had conceptualized the idea of females having their own club, I thought, well, the right person to do that is the one who, I guess from university days, had the passion to do it. So I didn't ask her. I literally told her this is what she was going to do. So that has worked out pretty well. And so right now, as a result, she also co-authored my autobiography. And right now, I'm in the UK, really dealing with that at the moment.
And I've got big ups actually, because you are a doctor in your own right. I mean, I know it's not. I've interviewed quite a lot of doctors on What Happens Next over the last few weeks. But what did you do your doctorate on, Sasha?
So my PhD is in cultural studies, and my thesis was actually women's football development in the Anglophone Caribbean. And my thesis was this concept of normal, natural, and proper. Under Mr. Butcher's guidance, we had advocated for a women's football league in Barbados, and we went to a few meetings with the leadership of the Barbados Football Association at that time. And a senior official in the organization made some really ludicrous statements about, women shouldn't be breast strapping balls and it's not normal or natural for women to play football. And at that same time, I was doing my PhD upgrade, and in class, we would talk about the intersection of sport and culture and the fact that most of the challenges converge on the female body. And I was having difficulty finding a thesis, and everybody was like, no, you don't have difficulty. Write about football, write about your experiences, because sport is a big part of Caribbean culture and there's not much written on it outside of football. And so normal, natural and proper women's football development in the Caribbean, the period up until 2012 was birth.
Love that. Roland, when you describe your journey from 2019 to today, it doesn't sound like a conventional retirement to me, because it sounds like you're doing more now than you were before. So what does retirement mean? I mean, because I think about this quite a lot when I'm talking to my clients, because I think that old-fashioned view of retirement where you just stop, most people don't want to do anymore. So what's your view of retirement, particularly when it pertains to the role work and writing books and doing the commentating plays in your life?
Well, for me, I keep telling people, when people ask me about retirement, I tell them it's the best job I've ever had, retirement. Basically, you go to work when you feel like, you leave when you feel like.
Yeah.
And if you don't feel it going to work on a particular day, you don't. No, listen, since I retired 2019, I've got very busy. Not that I wasn't busy before, but I was busy, obviously, doing things that had to be done for other purposes. Right now, I'm doing things that I want to do, and things that I enjoy, and things that perhaps earlier in my life I didn't get the opportunity to do. So, I'm doing, plenty. So doing the commentary, working with the girls' cricket club. I'm the president of that club. Helping them develop, structurally, working with sponsors, etc., to get the female game of cricket recognized properly in Barbados and in the Caribbean. And
I love that.
Sasha is the chair of that. So really, she's the one who does the hard work. Really, she and her team, they run the operation. And
you get to do the fun stuff, right?
Well, I on the outside. I mean, when something is needed, we chat about it, and I get to work. And obviously, I keep in close contact. We discuss on a regular basis what's happening, what needs to be done, and that's been going really well. So, yeah, I'm extremely busy, and I wouldn't want it any other way, because I've always believed that the quickest way to go downhill is to sit around and do nothing.
Yeah, I agree.
When you've got too much time on your hands, then you're thinking. So right now, I'm flat out, and I like it that way, and I wouldn't want it any other way.
But the fact that you've got the choice and you're doing stuff you love is really important. What I'm curious about is that element of going through those periods of change, because you were a professional sportsman and then made a period of change, and then you stopped the coaching element in 2019 and we'll call it retired. I don't think it is actually retired, but we'll call it retired. Stop doing what you were doing in 2019 and transitioned. What do you think you've learned the most about going through? Because when I think about people who watch this channel, we get emails all the time. And that transition, that change is often quite challenging for people. So what do you think you've learned the most about going through periods of change?
Well, Chris, in actual fact, the change has been very easy for me, because I think I recognized very early in life that there's three phases to your life, really. One is learning, and I worked out that the 20s is your learning years, 30s to 60s is your earning years, and 60s beyond is your returning years. So I worked that out pretty early in the piece. So as each phase came about, I realized that that's what was going to happen. So you learn in the 20s, then the next 30 plus years you work, and then after that it's about returning returning. That's what I'm doing now. I'm returning at the back end of my life.
And what does returning? Because often that traditional model is learn, earn, and stop, and I don't believe stop is good for any of us. What does returning, in your definition of that, actually mean?
But returning is, for me, taking all your experience, and putting it into things that will help other people in the future, help young people, etc. So really, that's what my life is about now. It's about how can I make people's lives that much better in the future. And if I can play a small part in making that happen, then, at the end of this life, I can feel satisfied that I didn't just only take from this world, that I was able to give back as well.
Yeah, it's so important. And you mentioned about that change being fairly easy, but I've also, on my research, I know you've said the fact that no journey is always easy, that element of challenge in all of our lives. What role do you think resilience plays, and our personal ability to cope with change plays? And how do we get more resilient? How do we become more resilient?
Yeah, I think resilience plays a huge part. There's no question about that, because every time you ask for something, you're not going to get it. So you've got to recognize that you might ask, somebody might say no, but in actual fact they might be saying yes, but you just haven't asked the question in the right way. So you've got to be resilient. You've got to be persistent, and and stay focused to what really your initial intention was. If you want to achieve something, you should expect that along the way you're going to have hiccups, you're going to have problems, you're going to take one step forward, two back. If at that point you're ready to give up, or you do give up, then you'll never achieve that. I've always believed that, yes, you will encounter challenges, but there's always a way around it. You just find another route to get around those challenges. But the important thing is to stay focused on the goal and be very resilient in chasing that goal.
Sasha, you seem to me, even when you described the story about the first time you met Roland, to be a very resilient person. What's your perspective on resilience?
Yeah, I think if life were easy, we'd all be successful, right? Whatever success means to us. And I think I remember growing up, I had an older cousin who would say to me, you just have so much faith, right? I wasn't born into a rich family, but I just believed that whatever I wanted, God would align so that things would happen. And so there were times where, whether it's a field trip or something needed for school, I'm just like, yeah, so-and-so is going to happen. And she's like, well, how? I'm like, I don't know, but it'll work out. And I think that has carried me, even at university level, a number of challenges, whether it was academically, school fees, etc. Like just varying challenges you experience at different times in life. Playing football, losing a match, a key match, or you're in a final. I always remember this one final. We were 2-0 down with 5 minutes to go in the game, and I was captain of the humanities team. And you're there crying on the field because I'm like, no, we didn't come this far to just lose. And I think there was a foul, and I was basically telling everybody we can do this, and we scored 2 goals, or I think the 3 goals to win that match. And so I think the idea is, even when the end seems imminent, to just not give up, to just keep pushing, to just keep pressing. And my perspective, I think, has carried me throughout. So at work, in professional settings, I'm always the one like, yeah, I feel a little daunted, or this is affecting me, but we must find a way. Like there has to be a way. And then, in the end, if it doesn't happen, there's a lesson to be learned for the next time.
Yeah, and there's no straight line, right? There's no straight line towards it. It's always a bit ups, and as you guys said, ups and downs, and a bit wiggly. I love that story of the football match. That could be a movie, couldn't it? 2-0 down with 10 minutes to go, and then getting there. Now, what I want to explore in this interview is the importance of mentoring, coaching, and positive role models in our lives. And what I want to do, Roland, is really ask you a question about how mentors and coaches have helped you and what you've learned from being a mentor and coach for such a long time.
Yeah, I think mentoring and coaching are very important things. I think first for me, my first mentor really was my grandmother.
Yeah.
And I think watching her work really hard, hours and hours in some very hot and uncomfortable cane fields, without complaining, and then working just as hard at home with the family and stuff. That's taught me the whole idea of resilience, etc. So, mentorship there was important. Then, obviously, in my cricket career, I think then having someone like Mike Brearley as captain of Middlesex, he was a mentor. I also had mentors outside of that in football. Alan Sefton from Arsenal Football Club. He was a mentor. So, these are people who really, number one, believed in me, and two, they felt that I could achieve things and I was worth the effort for them to invest. Now, personally, for me, I believe that as a result of all of that, that has prepared me also for, the role of mentorship. I mean, the other person who played a big role in mentoring was Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, who's the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, because when I went into the university from a life of professional cricket, they couldn't be any further apart. So this was my first opportunity to be working within the university. I was very fortunate that he was the principal at the university at the time, had the visions of developing the sport, obviously the belief in me, but he mentored me through the whole university process, which Sasha will tell you that if the life of a student is hard and complicated, I can assure you that working with academics within the university is 10 times more difficult. So
what was the coming from sport to academia, what was the biggest culture shock?
For me, it was trying to understand how academics work and how they think. I wouldn't say that all academics embrace you from outside of academia.
Yeah, that's interesting. Sasha, what's your perspective on that?
Sasha will be able to tell you more about that, but I can tell you that.
I might have just, I'm digging myself a rabbit hole here, I think. But what's your perspective on that, Sasha? What do you think the big cultural differences between sport and academia?
Listen, oh boy. Academia can be very elitist. Academia within a British system, and the reason I say British is because obviously we inherited our education system from the UK. Academia at the university can be very elitist. So imagine this guy, right? So I'm going to say this guy because one of the things I appreciate about Mr. Butcher is how humble he was in writing this book. We clarified so many misunderstandings that we had as students at the university, academics blossoming. And this guy is coming from the outside, not a part of any university system, and trying to dictate to us what we need to do. Like, who do you think you are? We didn't know who he was. And I'm, in the process of writing the book, I'm like, why didn't you say you had experience? So academic rigor asks you to question, to verify, to validate. He did none of those things for us. So I think there was difficulty in understanding how this person outside of academia, who unfortunately, for those of us where cricket was not the center of our world, as I said, my sports were tennis, hockey, football. And even though cricket is a big part of Caribbean culture, it wasn't necessarily my favorite sport. You know, outside of knowing who the West Indian greats were, I couldn't necessarily tell you who the greats from England or South Africa was. So imagine when he comes to our nice Caribbean centered university, there was some difficulty with him transitioning for that reason. I think.
And I get the impression that like Roland's perspective isn't to be showy about his achievements, because that's not the sort of person he is. But so there's a knowledge gap there, isn't there, in terms of what you know? And
Yes. So even in doing some of the research, I remember the first time I actually stayed in the UK and I went to the museum at Lord's and doing the research, and I walk into this building and there's this uniform, and I was asking someone about Roland Butcher, etc. And I met these two guys and they were like getting goosebumps telling me about his Middlesex run. And he's like, you came for good cricket, but if Roland was batting and he had a good day, like, you didn't care about anything else. You cared about him batting. And then, they said things like, even though he was good with the bat, you needed to see him field. And until he had gotten his accident, I think he was he had already passed the leaderboard. And so, he probably would have had a record that remained unbroken. And I got basically the royal treatment simply because of my affiliation with Roland. And when I came back, I made the joke with him, my name is now Sasha Butcher, because if this is the treatment I'm getting from people who know you, right, and they don't know me. And so it's like, he's never said the experiences or the things that he's done. I love Arsenal, and he ran Arsenal soccer schools, and Miss Butcher, like, it was more annoying doing the book and learning about all
learning as much as you did.
had we
Yeah.
known then what we know now, I was like, missed opportunity. But it is just like him to just be like, no, I think we should do this, and everybody's questioning him like, are you sure? Do you really know? And now you're like, yeah, he did know.
Yeah, I've got a lot of respect for humility as a trait, though. Do you know what I mean? I think actually just sort of recognizing who you are, recognizing what you've done, but also recognizing that we're all human and fallible, and sort of just trying our best is really important. Sasha, what I'm really curious about is your experience being coached and being mentored, particularly with Roland. What did you get out of that experience?
Yeah. And I think, we talk about mentorship as if there's this like signed agreement, you're going to mentor me or whatever. But what I've found is when Mr. B started coaching us, and in our eyes, he had proven himself, because obviously as students, we know everything, right? But when he started coaching and we started seeing results, I think for our football team, more than any other team on campus at the time, he was in. So every problem we had, we just went to Mr. Butcher. He probably had headaches from us because his office was open door policy, right? So you just walked in and sat down. Mr. B, this is the problem. But he would say what he thought. He would allow you to make the mistake. And he would never say, I told you so, which was kind of frustrating. I think we more expected somebody to say, I told you so, than to try to resolve the problem. And then there were a few instances where he just said, no, this is what we're doing. And you're like, fine, yeah. I don't want to do it. But then it works out. And so you keep building that trust. And then you realize, hey, maybe I don't know anything at all. So let me just stay close to this person. And you start having more conversations. And so I think the mentorship begins organically in that way, right? So you find yourself leaning on that expertise more, and beyond professional, you start saying, well, I'm not happy at the university. I remember at the time I wanted to leave, and we had this long conversation outside by the cricket field, and he didn't think that I should leave. He thought I should have patience. But again, that's that generation where you persevere and you move. Whereas in my generation, we're all for perseverance and resilience, but we also were beginning to think, but if you're not happy, then, you have a right to make that change. And we never lost contact. So he was coaching on the field, but he also started coaching us in life. So much so that team, after about 20 something years, we're still all in a group chat together. We still all make plans to hang out. And I think, no other team benefited from that coaching and from that mentorship. So, yeah.
Love that. You make such an interesting point, though, because actually you don't need the permission to mentor, right? You don't need a label to mentor, because actually if you've got relationships through your life where you're trying to help others, you're probably playing the role of mentor. Roland, one thing I'm really curious about, and I think about this quite a lot, is that mentor role and that coach role. How do they differ, and how do you know whether you're mentoring or coaching, or doesn't it matter?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. Does it matter? I think the best way to mentor is to be a good role model. If you are a good role model, then the persons in your care will take from what they see in that role model, the good bits from that role model, to help themselves as they go forward. So I think first and foremost is to be a good role model for those people that come into your care. I think once that happens, it's just an easy process, because the persons will pick up from you. Well, this is what I like about this person that will help me going forward. And you will become a mentor without realizing that you are a mentor, without signing the contract, as Sasha said, to be a mentor.
That element of accidental mentoring, I think we probably all do in our lives if we're good role models. It's so interesting. And I think for me, that element of because a lot, what happens next is designed to help people who are leaving business life and thinking about the next chapter, want retirement lives probably as busy as yours, Roland, which means not retiring, but have so much both in experience, knowledge, skills and attitude to give to others. If they're thinking, I think mentoring or coaching might be a way to add value to people along the journey, what might be one thing that they might want to do to take that first step?
I think what anybody should do is, first of all, whatever they're doing, try and do it well. Because, if they do it well, it will then have a ripple effect. If you do a pretty poor job, then that has a ripple effect as well, but in the opposite direction. So, whatever I take on, I try to do it to the best of my ability, so that people can take from that. So I think that's an important thing to do. Make sure that every task that you take on, do it the best that you can. Yeah,
I love that. Sasha, what's yours though? So if somebody was thinking about mentoring or coaching, what should they think about as do I really want to do this, and what's my natural first step?
A consideration, just to go in a slightly different direction, is more often than not, we put mentors on pedestals. So I would encourage people, if you're going into mentorship, to make sure you are speaking this language, that I might be great professionally in this area, but mentors are also humans. Simply because when you look up to somebody, if there is a potential failure on the part of that person, it can derail that mentorship. But I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned from Mr. Butcher, not from him saying it, but is that he's human. And I think we were able to see that in his transition to the University of the West Indies, and then reflecting on the success that we've had in the approximately 15 years as director of sport, and how the sports program, his area of expertise, blossomed. And so what that did is it compensated for any quote unquote failures we perceived by him not being an academic. And so I think that was an interesting lesson for us to learn, that you didn't need a PhD. If you needed it, all of us probably would be great coaches on the field. So as a mentor, I would say, own your strengths and your expertise, but also recognize that we're human and we're fallible and we have weaknesses. And so you're able to share that information with anybody you're willing to or expecting to mentor.
It's such
Chris,
an interesting.
Chris, can I add one thing to that as well?
Goes.
I think one thing you should recognize is that coaching and mentoring, it's not about you. It's not about what you have done. That's, you can go and read about that somewhere else. So that's the first thing to do, is to recognize that you're now dealing with other persons. They're not interested or should not be interested in what you have done. So that's the first thing.
Yeah, I love that. I also love the element that where, Sasha, you were talking about being, because Roland, what you're talking about is actually the role of a mentor and coach is about empowering other people to succeed, right? That's the job. The job isn't about you, it's about them. Yeah. Sasha, your thought about being human, I've been thinking about this quite a lot, because we all make mistakes as humans. Mm-hmm. And I'd be really fascinated, Roland and Sasha, on your perspective about managing failure, managing mistakes, and doing it in a way that allows us to continue to evolve. Because we, as you said, Sasha, we're all human. Roland, what are your thoughts on trying our best, making the mistakes, but also learning from those mistakes? How do you manage mistakes mentally when you're not only in your own life, but also when you're mentoring and coaching?
Well, I always ask myself one question, what would I do if I knew I would be successful? And that's an interesting question, because, you have to think about that. And then I come back to the point that, well, you don't know that you're going to be successful. So it means that you have to try and try again. So failure becomes part and parcel of the whole process. You try one way, it doesn't work. You don't give up, you try another way. So, you must understand that, if everything you did was successful, life would be boring, wouldn't it? Where would you get the motivation to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and go at it again?
I find myself in my own life using the phrase quite a lot: you either win or you learn. And actually the learn element is often as powerful as the win, right? Because you allowed to, that's what makes life painful sometimes, but interesting. But yeah, it's interesting. I love that. Sasha, what are your thoughts on failure, and what have you learned over the years?
There's this quote that I like from Truman Capote that says, "Failure is the condiment that gives success its flavor."
Oh, I love that. Is that Truman Capote?
Truman Capote, yeah. Failure is the condiment that gives success its flavor. So, as Mr. B said, you can't be successful all the time. When you listen to elite athletes speak, right? They don't just talk about their successes or the goals or how the goals were scored. When they review the tapes, they also talk about what they could have done better. In the areas where they've quote unquote failed, it's almost like failing forward. What could I have learned? Just as you said, Chris. So I think a lot of times people misunderstand failure as a personal flaw as opposed to something that happened. So when you fail at something, you think, oh my gosh, I am a failure. So they project it onto themselves, and we have to learn to separate it. I failed in this. So how can I do it better next time? And I believe once we learn or we shift that perspective, that because you failed at something, it doesn't equate to you being a failure. We'd be a lot better at trying again and trying again, because, oh shoot, oh my gosh.
The individual and the behavior, isn't it?
Behavior, exactly. Or the yeah. So, I think it's important for us to learn that in life. And in business, people learn it in business all the time. It's why some of the most successful businesses say I failed 50 times before, we were actually successful. And I think it's a lesson that we need to transfer in life.
You mentioned earlier about that element where you had a bit of a generational difference in terms of giving up and staying persistent. And I'm always curious about when the right time to do that is. So what have you learned, Sasha, about is there a right time? Is there a good time? How do you decide when to persist and actually stop and go and do something else?
Yeah, I think it goes back to knowing your purpose, right? So just if you give me a few minutes, I know that I was born to help others, to serve, right? And even when I introduce myself, sometimes I say my name is Sasha and it means helper of mankind. So it doesn't matter if I'm doing gas at the gas station. It doesn't matter if I'm a teacher. It doesn't matter if I'm a coach. It doesn't matter if I'm just sitting and talking. I believe I exist to help others. So I know what my passion and my purpose is. I also know what my core values are, authenticity, family, etc. So when I move in a sphere where, in my view, that is not being honored, I know that perhaps it's time to move on. And I don't move on at the first time. You may stay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And I think in the instance where I made some of the biggest changes, it was because I am given 210%. And I feel, or I know that the change on the other side is not going to happen. So either I make the change for what's best for me, or I'm going to stay here and regret having been here for 50 years, anticipating a change that I knew was not coming. So that's how I know when it's time to move. But in the midst of saying all of that, I appreciate the durability and the resilience and the stickability is the young people's word, right? Of the older generation to stay in a job and build a life around that job for how many years. And I admire the characteristics of the older generation to do it. But there is this innate in the newer generation, my generation, certainly an appreciation of that, but also knowing who I am. But then you can go to the other extreme where you just think, I deserve everything now, and if I don't get it, I'm leaving. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the balance where I want to stay in this is my lifelong journey. But if I know that I'm not being appreciated, I'm not being honored, and that's not going to happen anytime soon, I know it's time to shift.
I love that. That element of alignment of value to your environment is, I think, really important. Because if you're in environments where the values aren't aligned, yes, there's an element to say, you can influence it to a certain extent, but how much time do you do that? Roland, what are your thoughts on that? What's the litmus test where we go, shall I stay or shall I go? How do we make that choice?
Well, my thoughts are very clear on that. I mean, when you feel that you no longer can make a difference, I think it's time to step off and move in a different direction, because that's what you should be trying to do all the time, trying to make a difference. When that situation arises, whether it's, if you're a coach of a team and, you cannot affect the results that team wants, after a while, it's time for you to move out of the way and let somebody else get on with the job. So once that point comes where you recognize that, you cannot add value, then, it's time to move.
Yeah, it's positive.
Before you get moved.
That's true. But yeah, but I actually think that, for me anyway, that desire to make a positive impact and the ability to make a positive impact also contributes to my happiness. I know people who stay in an environment because of probably security but not well-being, and that can be really detrimental to their overall happiness, because they don't see that positive impact in their lives. Now, I'm really curious about the book. I want to talk about the book, and we'll make sure we promote where people can get the book at the end. tell me a little bit, Sasha, about what you learned from the experience of writing the book with Roland.
So it was my first go at writing a complete text, right? I had done my thesis before, but when we came to this and when Mr. Butcher told me, not asked, when he told me that I was going to do this, I was like, no, not me, because I just felt like, having known the history now, I felt like somebody who was way better should be doing it. It's not to discount what I think about my writing skills. I just thought bigger, editor, it just deserved more than what I thought I could offer. But going back to what he's taught as a mentor and a coach, right? Resilience, you can do it. Set the goal, start working towards it. And so it was almost like you attack it like a football game. You do the warm up, right? You start writing, and then the first half goes, you change strategy towards the end. There was crunch time. Are we going into overtime, etc.? And I think the biggest lesson I have learned is that there's stories to tell, and I want to be a part of telling those stories.
Love that.
This is completely different to me wanting to be this academic and this professional. I have found a new passion, and so what this book has allowed me to do in the lead up to writing it, I went and I started reading a lot of autobiographies from different persons, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. And I think we did a really great job at capturing what Mr. Butcher would allow us to capture, because I do think that there's some stories that, we were like, Mr. Butcher, come on, there must be more to it than this. And he's like, no, this is just it. But that's his personality and having to pry information out of it. But what it has opened my eyes to is that there's stories to tell, and I am passionate.
You know what? I now want to know what the stories that aren't in the book, as opposed to are in. Roland, what was the journey like for you? Thinking about your life in that way, and thinking about, number one, working collaboratively with Sasha and putting the book together, but also going back. And what was the process of writing the book like for you?
It was a really enjoyable one. Listen, this is something I knew I would have to do at some time in life, but you never know when. And the timing was perfect because yes, it was Sasha's first book, but I believed, that she was capable of doing it and doing it well. There are many published authors out there that, keen to do, cricket books and autobiographies, but, I felt that she was someone who knew me pretty well for the last 20 odd years, also in a sporting context as well. And the other projects that we have worked on. And also it would be, I know she loves a challenge. So I knew that this was the perfect challenge for her, really, to get her on her feet and moving forward, and perhaps then develop that passion in her to go beyond this and do other biographies and autobiographies after this. But yeah, I guess it was perhaps all part of the whole mentorship process.
Well, that's what's going through. That seems to me like mentorship and coaching in action, isn't it? There's a challenge. Sasha's gonna initially not want to do it, but then say yes. But then, like, you get to a point where you're at the other end. And are you glad you did it, Sasha?
I am. So, honestly, there are things I wish I knew of, now then. I am very happy with the finished product. I am very happy with what we've done. I am excited just to see him, travel across the UK and go to the US and hopefully to other continents to share his story. and I don't think it is actually one of the defining moments in my life. Like I had a part to play when you know just the basics. First West Indian, first black guy to play cricket for England, the impact he's had on university life, 15 years of international success for a university campus. And he's been at the helm of that. And you got to write that story. You got to share that through him, you got to weave that into this dialogue that people are now going to read. It is up there with among the best things I've ever done in life. And as you said, in terms of coaching, he must have known, because the no was strong. The no was like no. But he must have seen something there that needed to come out, and now it is something that I want to do. I could not tell you that I wanted to write biographies and autobiographies before, but now he's ignited something in this story.
What skills did both of you learn through the process of writing the book?
Record everything. Record everything, because if you forget that thought, it is almost good as gone.
Yeah. How about you, Roland? What did you learn through the writing of the book, do you think?
I learned it's a very long process. I know that. an exhausting process. I mean, Sasha would tell you sometimes 3-4 o'clock in the morning we were still going through chapters. I did put her under a little bit of pressure, because we didn't really start the book until October, November. And I told her that, I really want to have it ready.
Finished. Yeah.
I want it finished by the beginning of April. But yeah, listen, I think it was enjoyable, to really get it all down. And as Sasha said, to record, go over it. And, but for me, the whole idea of, having to go over chapters, several times, it
was work.
It's work. It's daunting.
I know that, because I'm just going through the next draft of the What Happens Next book I'm publishing next year, and along with the day job, it is a lot of work, isn't it? But one that's definitely gonna be worth it when it comes out.
But what I would say, Chris, is that despite all of that, we're extremely happy with what we've produced, and the way that it has been received, has been fantastic. So, I think we did a pretty good job.
Can I say one thing there? You've done a good job. Like he'd spoken about his mentor being Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, and Professor Beckles was at the university. I had sent the book through a friend to Professor Beckles, and he came to do a lecture on campus that we went to. And I just went to say hi, and he said, I read the book and enjoyed it. Simple statement.
When the mentor of your mentor loves it, you've done a good job.
I was like, I don't care what anybody else says. This is excellent. This is it.
When the mentor of your mentor loves the book, you've done a good job. It's really interesting. I'm very much aligned with you guys. My last book, I wrote a book on kindness, and I'll get you guys sent a copy, because I'd love to know what you guys think.
Yeah.
And seeing people make positive change, or getting something from your book, is knowing that, because when you're writing it, you don't know, do you? You're sitting in that silo of you two working on the book, or me working on the book. When you see its positive impact on the world and other people enjoying the stories, it's absolutely brilliant. Last question for me is, we've talked quite a lot about identity, and both of you have gone through these shifts of identity. And a lot of my clients, a lot of people who watch this channel, tell me a little bit about the struggles they face with shifting their identity. Sasha, take your example from an academic writer to an autobiographical writer. That shift in identity. What do you reckon the key is to change for Roland, for you, from professional athlete to coach, and now to the commentator? What do you reckon the key is to making that identity change as easy as it can be?
I think, yeah. So, I am a faith-based believer. I believe in God. I believe in Jesus Christ, etc. And the Bible tells us that there's a change, there's a time for everything. And I think if you believe that, right? People say there are reasons, seasons, and lifetime, but there's a time for everything. So I'm in the midst of a change now. I feel like, I'm at the top of a mountain, but when you're at the top of the mountain, the next step is to go down into the valley to get to the next top.
Yeah.
If you understand that there are always changing tides and there are always different seasons, then it makes it easier to cope. It doesn't make it easy. It just makes it easier to cope. And I think that's where my grounding is.
That's really interesting, because I'm not religious, but I love Stoic philosophy. And the Stoic said the same thing. The only constant is change, right? Change is an impact in our life. But that seasons element, Sasha, I love. Roland, what's your perspective on it?
My perspective is that obviously I'm at a different phase of life right now to Sasha, and I'm at the phase now where I'm thinking that I have to get as much done as possible in the time remaining. So, I just want to do more and more things because, I cannot see another 50 years when I was 20.
Yeah.
You're thinking about retirement. That's 50 years down the line. So I want to do more now than perhaps I did in those first 50 years, because the time remaining is so short. So
of course.
You've got to do as much as possible.
And I know that, Sasha, there's probably religious perspectives to this as well, but I go back to the philosophical perspective of memento mori, that Stoic philosophy of remember that time is actually a finite asset, right? That's the bit that we need to make the most of. And I reckon that you two are definitely making the most of it in your own individual ways. I've loved today. Thank you for coming on. I've really enjoyed digging a bit deeper, asking the questions, and I'm going to get that Truman. I've got a gap on my wall in my office, Sasha. I'm going to get that Truman Capote quote up on my wall. I think I really like that. Where can people find out more about the book?
Right. It's on Amazon for a start. They can also get it on the website www.rolandbutcher.co.uk. Myself, Sasha, within Barbados, they can get it from the Kensington Oval, and obviously also here in the UK. There's a number of bookshops, etc., and so there are many places that it can be found. And
love that. Thank you. And as I've been so inspired with the condiment quote, I want to finish on a bit of a silly question. What's the best condiment, do you reckon? What are we going for? We go for ketchup or mayo? Sasha, what would your one be?
Ketchup and mayo mixed.
Oh, now you've broken the rules, Sasha. What? How about you, Roland? What's the best condiment?
For me, oh boy, that's a very tight one. I love Bajan hot sauce. So for me, that's not the hot one. The yellow pepper sauce with ketchup. That's pretty good.
Perfect. I'm going to go for sriracha. I love sriracha sauce. That's my choice. On that note, thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for watching another What Happens Next interview, and we'll see you on the channel soon.